Welcome to Goal Getter, the AAP Physiotherapy podcast. My name is Jen Pantelak, and I'm the CEO of the Alberta Association of Physiotherapy. This show explores the power of physiotherapy, helping individuals move, heal, and thrive. Let's get moving. Today's episode is something special. We're exploring the power of partnership and collaboration and how that can accelerate the future of rehabilitation in Alberta. Today, we're joined by four incredible guests who bring this partnership to life. Nancy Walter from Alberta Innovates, Mark Corthius from Glenrose Hospital Foundation, Jessica Domenko, who is leading one of the funding innovation projects, and Gautam Satarangi, representing the technology partner supporting Jessica. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
So to kick us off, Nancy and Mark, can you tell us a little bit about what inspired this collaboration between Alberta Innovates and Glenrose Hospital Foundation?
In 2020, our foundation's strategy refocused towards how technology and innovation can help transform care in Alberta. One of the gaps in care that we've seen and noticed is we provide equitable access to rehab care, not only in Edmonton, where the Glenrose is based, but across the province, particularly as it relates to rural and remote communities. And for us as a health foundation who have scarce resources to deploy for a number of needs, both urgent in the hospital today and also forward looking, partnerships is a great way in which to leverage those scarce dollars. And so when we had our initial conversations with our partners, Alberta Innovates, it became clear there was a lot of alignment between what we were trying to achieve as a foundation and what Alberta Innovates was trying to achieve with some of their new programming. And so it was really a natural fit, I think, for both of us, just to ensure that we can leverage the funding that we have, but also leverage the expertise that Alberta Innovates has with respect to executing larger scale programs like this. And I think so far it's been really enjoyable, both to get to know the folks at Innovates better and also see the progress that's been made to date, specifically around the projects that we're talking about today.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark. So maybe you're going to say, thank you, Captain Obvious, for this one. But I think fundamentally, when we came together, I think on a broader picture, the shared commitment here, I think that was identified right off the bat was, how can we improve and better the lives and well-beings of Albertans? And I think specifically over on the Glenrose Hospital Foundation side, of course, we're really talking about that human ability piece and how rehabilitation care can solve this. And so for us, for Alberta Innovates, as sort of a broader organization that can, and we're lucky to position that way, where we can convene and connect different partners in the health system. That's sort of where we found that synergy is, we can improve the life and well-beings. And in this case specifically, let's look at human ability and how we can do that through rehabilitation care. And so we've also gone recently through sort of an overhaul or evolution of our strategy. And if we weren't already pretty focused on that before, we definitely are now in saying that we really want to leverage research and innovation and just sort of allowing us to do things differently in Alberta, to both have societal impacts and economic impacts. And then on the other side with the Glenrose Hospital Foundation and then the work that happens over at the Glenrose Hospital, Jessica, through, of course, the work that you're doing and the teams that you're working with. I think when you find two partners that feel really strongly about innovation that can take on many different versions, I think there is a very obvious synergy right here. And so we found that coming together, we can really think about how can we do innovative models of care, leveraging technology and innovation to do just that and really improve the lives or well-being of Albertans. And then I think lastly, there was also a common understanding sort of in just recognizing that we can't do this alone. There are all these big problems that are to be solved. And I think we all like to be leaders, both locally, in the province of Alberta, in the city of Edmonton, in Canada, and globally as well. And so these things just don't happen in solitude. And so it just makes sense to come together and see how we can solve these complex problems together.
That's fantastic. And I think really does highlight that the value in partnership and bringing the right parties around the table to make great work happen.
Yeah.
And so with this particular project, the focus was really on how to better support rural and remote with healthcare. What kind
Correct.
of proposals were you looking for when you launched this innovation?
So, Mark, do you mind? Or, I mean, I'll just jump in, and then, of course, if anyone else wants to jump in, feel free. So we did, as Mark mentioned, the focus is rural and remote, both because we've come to realize maybe I should take a step back and just, we first we are really trying to understand what problem are we solving. I think we have a rural health action plan here in Alberta. It's a provincial priority. It's important to us. It's important to the Glenrose because they see a number of patients. When we did read out to get some data, there's at least 10,000 patients a year that sort of have to travel and come into Edmonton to receive specialized rehabilitation care at the Glenrose Hospital Foundation. So, if you weren't aware before, we are very lucky here in Edmonton to have a, specialized tertiary standalone rehabilitation facility. I don't know, Mark, is it the only one in Canada, Western Canada at least?
Yes, in Canada. In Canada, yeah.
In Canada. Okay, so we're very lucky being in this urban center, right? But if you imagine everybody else who requires specialized care, that is really hard to get in rural and remote. So this is what we're trying to solve. So first we gain an understanding, okay, is that really a need? And the answer was clear, yes. People have to sort of slow down their lives, take days off. That's not always feasible to come here and receive the services they need. And then with that, sometimes there's wait times. It's really hard to manage for people that are not able to easily access the services if they're accessible in the first place, because there is a lot of people that require care. And then we were really lucky to build and lean on advisory committee that again, thanks to our partners over at the Glenrose Hospital Foundation as well, we were able to leverage their network and see who are some of the experts in the field in Alberta that we can lean on and build this advisory committee to help us better understand what is really getting in the way and what are those problems that we're solving. And so ultimately, sort of we phrased this partnership around two challenge statements. That then would allow us to draw in hopefully technology solutions that can help solve those problems. And the first challenge was really about how can we create equitable access to rehabilitation care for those living in rural and remote Alberta. And then the second important piece here is transitions in care. So once you have been lucky, enough to receive that care that you need at the Glenrose Hospital, and now you transition back into your community and back into your home, how can we ensure that the care that you need continues to be delivered to you in a way that is meaningful and impactful? And so when we were looking for proposals, that's really what it was about. It's like, how can we solve both the access question and the transitions and care question? And maybe I'll pause here to let others jump in as well.
Yeah, I would just to what Nancy said is, what we found in our research, there's 10,000 Albertans that travel from rural and remote regions to Edmonton for specialized rehab care. And as a foundation hospital, our mission and pretty simple is that we want individuals that have been in the healthcare systems to return home and be able to have independence and function to the best of the ability based on their condition, which oftentimes are quite complex. We also know that technology is rapidly accelerating and that it can serve as a useful tool to enable patients not have to come to urban setting if it's not absolutely necessary, because we know that people want to be in their homes. People do not want to be in the hospitals. They don't have to be. And so for us as a foundation, it was just another opportunity to use technology as a tool to ensure that patients can receive the best quality care in the communities that they live, can continue to be with their families, serve their communities, and live in the way they want to. So that's really at the crux of what we were looking to do, is ensure that care is provided in the communities in which these individuals live, and ensure that it's high quality. And so it'll be really enjoyable and interesting to watch how these projects evolve over the course of of the project, because ultimately we hope that they can become sticky enough that the system can adopt them and they become new standards of care in the future.
Oh, thanks for that, Mark. If you don't mind, Jen, if I jump in on that piece as well, with the stickiness. So I really appreciate that comment, and maybe I want to go one step further on sort of what we were looking for as it relates to those proposals, and hopefully, Jessica, when we maybe dig a little deeper into the work that you're doing, it'll become clear more tangibly what we were looking for. But at a general level, we were looking for projects that, yes, they meet the requirement of solving the access question and solving the transitions question, but two, with the technology that they are leveraging in this implementation study. Um, is there sort of a high potential for impact? So does it become clear in the proposal that yes, there ideally both is potential for high impact on patient outcomes and experiences, and then two, on the ROI as it relates to sort of health system savings? Because broadly, the problem that we're solving, of course, is also the health system sustainability piece, um, and supporting the health system refocus efforts and thinking about how can we do things differently through these innovative and new models of care that leverage technology. And so, yeah, we really wanted to see that piece around, is there potential for high impact? And then lastly, is there a sustainability path moving forward? And I'm sure you're all familiar with this term around the implementation crisis, that we talk about here in Canada, and then beyond for sure, where we're so good at starting these implementation studies and testing something for a year or two, and then it just kind of fizzles out. And so, what we want to both understand and try to do better is, what does it take to make these things now stick? And so, for these proposals, one of the big pieces was around, what is your sustainability plan? How is this going to survive and thrive past that 2-year project cycle? And if what was presented, is promising, then you're more likely of getting that funding, because we really do want to move beyond implementation into sustainability. And Jessica and her team all around did a great job, but on that topic as well.
So before we jump into Jessica's project, as the applications were coming in, did you notice any common themes or problems that were being addressed in the applications?
Uh, so, and please jump in if I sort of misspeak, because I'm not an expert in the field, so I might sort of misspeak on the technicalities of it. But yes, so of course, again, remember we're grounded in the access and transitions question here. So most technologies were around, how can we allow either for assessment or monitoring remotely, sort of, so you don't have to come into the hospital to do that. And so leveraging digital health solutions that allow for motion capture and motion assessment, um, leveraging remote monitoring tools, or even just platforms that allow you to collect and self-collect data on sort of your progress, and or maybe if we're talking about pediatrics, allowing the family to better understand just these educational tools, so like a single platform where you can maybe communicate with your provider, capture some of that self-monitoring, and then also get some educational pieces that help you navigate the journey outside of the Glenrose Hospital. We also saw a project that leveraged technology for gamification, to allow for movement to be gamified. So if you were to do some exercises or practice at home that, for example, help you post stroke, then you can leverage that tool to do just that, but do it in a way that's maybe more fun and engaging, and allow patients to do it in a more effective way. And generally, I would say those type of solutions, they helped us address patients that had experienced spinal cord injuries, neurodevelopmental disorders, or a stroke as well. And so I would say most of our solutions and proposals framed around that.
Yeah, and I would just add one of the interesting data points that I noticed just during the stakeholder engagement process when we did our initial webinar was how much interest and desire there was to innovate and improve standards of care around transitions from hospital to as well as providing better access to care in rural communities. I think we had, Nancy can correct me, over 100
Yes.
clinics, hospital sites, researchers, companies attend the webinar, and it was really fascinating to see because you never really know. Like we did the research on the demand and need in these areas, which is pretty clear. But when you actually put it out to the market or the community to see, hey, are you interested in spending a portion of your day to listen and talk through this type of challenge? The answer was a resounding yes. So it's clear that not only do people need these types of services, but also that there's a really strong interest and demand from the sites to try to improve standards of care for their patients and clients across the province.
Well, and I think too, being in such a diverse province with, I mean, we have a couple urban centers, but a lot of the population lives outside and in surrounding areas. And we know there's challenges throughout the healthcare system. And one of those sometimes is that manpower to be able to support those rural and remote communities. So I love that this project is came to fruition and everyone came together to make it happen.
I was going to say, Jen, if I can make a quick plug too for you and your teams and other partners and collaborators as well. We're talking about partnership and collaboration here, and bringing together that group of 100 plus people to even again just understand even the problem and figure out what are we trying to really solve here. It took our partners at the Glenrose Hospital Foundation, Jen, you and your teams and others as well, that put out the word, that came together, even supported the event and sort of helping us manage and moderate, manage all the breakout rooms. So again, I think it's a really good showcase of how important it is to have those sector specific partners and enablers, that help us solve these big problems as it relates to these wicked problems in healthcare. So thank you to you and your teams as well for helping us make that happen, because it was quite impressive.
Always happy to help. Jessica, would love to dive into your project. You were successfully funded by this new fund. And what problem were you trying to solve with the project that you proposed?
Absolutely. So I think that Mark and Nancy have really captured very well what the problem statement was and the challenges that we were trying to address. And really, the core issue that we're tackling is this persistent and really concerning gap in access to rehabilitation. And, while this project is really focused on stroke and upper extremity function, it's really scalable to other patient populations as well, right? And so we know that when patients leave the hospital, that there's 2/3 of stroke survivors who are living with upper extremity impairment. This means that, they're not able to use their hands and their arms. It makes it really difficult for them to participate in activities of daily living. It affects their independence and their quality of life. And I guess on the research side and also clinically, we know that recovery doesn't end after inpatient care. And that with the right therapy, people can continue to make gains for months or even years after injury, right? Like through research, we've seen people decades after injury make some gains when they engage in rehab again. But I guess what we realize is that the reality is that so many individuals face systemic barriers. And ultimately, with stroke, there are some people who don't even receive outpatient therapy at all. So they're either not able to participate in these specialized rehabilitation outpatient programs that we have at the Glenrose, for example, because they live in rural communities and they face transportation challenges, financial barriers. Maybe they're having to return to work quickly, or they're simply never actually referred. I think when Nancy said, if they even do get access at all, right? And this is due to a lot of capacity constraints within the system that we know are there. So they're not small issues, and they ultimately leave a large proportion of our population with no opportunity to continue, their recovery journey. And so our project with Gautam and with my co-investigator Rob Hershey is really aiming to address that gap kind of heads on. And so we're hoping to design this telerehabilitation model to help deliver rehab care to people where they are. So literally in their homes and their communities, like Mark said, and give them guided evidence-based therapy that they wouldn't otherwise receive. And so it's really about restoring access, promoting health equity, and ensuring that no one's recovery is sort of limited by geography or system constraints.
That's great. And I know, Nancy, you talked a little bit about outcomes in terms of seeing where these projects are at down the road. Jessica, what are you hoping will improve for patients, healthcare providers, really the system as a whole, like through the project? I know you had mentioned a couple already.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I guess the inspiration for this really came from two converging realities, right? You have the research piece and the clinical piece that has this overwhelming evidence that high dose task specific rehab will create meaningful functional recovery for people. And then on the other hand, we see a healthcare system that's sort of not set up to deliver that level of care to everyone who needs it. Together with that, digital health platforms and technologies like Tensor have really advanced dramatically. And so they're no longer experimental. They're clinically validated, they're user friendly. People are already using Tensor, which I'm sure Gautam will touch on later on. But we essentially the spark for this project was to reach the unreached, right? Which is what it's talking about. And that came from discussing with our clinicians where there were these gaps. And so scalability and implementation are very important for the study. So there's sort of different levels, I guess, of impact and outcomes that we're hoping for. And so obviously for the patients, it's improved function, improved like participation in their lives, improved quality of life. But beyond the clinical metrics, we want people to feel empowered in their recovery journey, right? To feel like rehab's possible and accessible, even if they can't physically attend a clinic. For our healthcare providers, we're hoping that we're able to streamline care delivery by offering a model that is clinician guided, but not clinician dependent in the traditional sense, right? So therapists are monitoring progress remotely. They can make targeted adjustments, working with Tensor. We can identify, how the progress pipelines work, like as they progress and as the recovery progresses. And ultimately, like allowing clinicians to support more individuals without increasing that in-person workload. At the health system level, I guess the goal is to really demonstrate that innovative equity focused care can fill in gaps within the system without increasing strain on an already limited outpatient like resource, right? And so I really like this project. I really liked Tensor because I think we tried to identify Gautam where with Rob, where we could make the largest impact like early on, but just the potential for scalability and sustainability is there, right? I mean, this can work for spinal cord injury. It could work for even some of the triaging work Nancy touched on as well, to help reduce wait lists for our clinics. And so I think it was about being strategic, in a way to identify what our outcomes would be and who we were targeting so that things could stick, like Nancy said, right? And we have a great team at the Glenrose who are working on other aspects of that piece, when it comes to, leading towards procurement, right? So we have things happening in parallel to make sure that this doesn't just stay a research study, right? It actually becomes integrated into the way that we're delivering rehab care in the province.
And to Nancy's point earlier, to be sustainable in the system, I think.
Exactly. Yeah.
So you've mentioned your technology partner, Tensor. Gautam, I want to throw it over to you. Could you give us a little bit of background about what this tool is that is part of the project?
Yeah. Thank you all for the opportunity to connect. And I feel like I've been really like-minded company. So if you don't mind, I'll start with a brief founding story about Tensor and how it fits into this story, because we all are very aligned on the problem that we're trying to solve, right? So two big things led to the founding of Tensor. Personal story for a minute. One, I'm one of the co-founders. I should have started with that. And so one thing is, when I was about halfway through my university degree, decided to get really healthy, ended up losing a little bit over 150 pounds of body weight. So I have to make the joke is I'm half the man I used to be. And what worked after years of trying and failing was basically three things. I found a friend to go to the gym with, so that made it fun and engaging. B, this friend happened to be really knowledgeable, and so he could contextualize the weight loss journey for me, right? The idea that nothing's going to happen for the first few weeks. You got to keep going. Eventually, you'll stop working, change up your routine. So there was guidance, right? And then C, Heart Zone training had just come onto the market, another great Canadian technology, by the way, and so used it to make sure I was working hard enough, essentially. So just got really obsessed with this idea that if you can provide people with a clear, measurable, actionable pathway, then they can do amazing things for themselves, right? So that was sort of inspiration number one for Tensor. And then inspiration number two is that my mom's an occupational therapist by training. And so I kind of grew up in the clinic. But there's this inherent limit, right? 98% of the patient's time, they're not going to be with their healthcare provider. And then, as we've been talking about today, you compound that with the rural nature of the province. And then in addition to that, just a sheer shortage of providers, that problem continues to get worse and worse, right? Which is a challenge. And so then patients always end up having questions. Am I moving in the right direction? Is this supposed to go this way? Or even just want to share progress, right? There's this human connection aspect of it as well. And we knew the problem was just going to continue to get worse because of the demographics. And so our founding principle is quite simple, which is what can we do to help healthcare providers extend care outside of the clinic into the home to create that experience that I had during my weight loss for these patients, right? This concept's not new, right? Like lots of companies out there doing care navigation in all sorts of ways, but we're really approaching it a little bit differently. And we specifically operate within what I'd like to call allied healthcare. And by that, where obviously rehab services are within that. And the reason is because two big things stand out to me there. One is it's very person centric, right? It's about how to get this individual back to their function, for their goals, for their stage of life, whether it is return to work, whether it is return to play, whether it is take care of your grandkids, whatever it is on that spectrum. And then secondly, outcomes are really quite meaningfully dependent on behavior change in the individual, in the patient. It's about what we in some of the industry call compliance, right? It's like how do you get the person onto that pathway for recovery? And so that's sort of the big idea behind Tensor, right? And so going out, starting from the founding days, we knew two big things were required in order to make this happen. One of which is, as I said, it's very person centric, which means the platform needs to be really configurable, right? Because something like this is dead in the water if I go to the clinical team and go, would you please use this new construct to try and come up with your plans of care, or this new template to come up with your plans of care? That's not how it works, right? These practitioners have developed over the years, their own playbook around how to treat patients, and arbitraging all sorts of different priorities. And so Tensor flipped it on its head and said, no, we are going to be configurable. We're going to absorb in the current pathways and digitize them for you. And then the second part of it is, because I'm able to do that, because I'm able to get the provider adoption, I can then use that data to create that engaging experience I was trying to articulate for the patient, right, for my weight loss journey. And so our broad concept there is gamification from the patient's perspective. And by that, I don't mean purely engagement, sort of like when you hit a button, there's confetti that comes out. We do that too. That's important. I'm not trying to minimize that, but it's really, what I mean is journification, which is can we empower the provider to let the patient know they're moving in the right direction, and here's what's coming next, or here's right? So it's a virtual version of the brick and mortar. And so that's what the platform is. We've been growing very rapidly, which we can talk about in a second. But then the key idea is then to find these practice areas where the care layer can be configured and put into place to achieve some priority. So in this particular case, the priority is, hey, we've got this rural population that is either unable to, or it would be preferable for them not to come in to specialized rehabilitation services within the city center. So we can configure the digital care layer for that. There's also capabilities to have people that are within the urban center maybe come in less frequently, so you increase access, free up some precious resources to see more patients. So there's a whole variety of things that can be done, but this is our sweet spot. It's this idea of how do you keep the provider empowered and in control, but effectively scale how many patients they can support, and decide which patient needs to be supported in what format, in clinic or rural, at home, or whatever spectrum there is in between. So that's the broad concept.
Mark had mentioned earlier that, technology is always evolving, always changing. There's always something new coming to market. Um, does Tensor work a lot with clinicians and patients to help develop the tool and bring that along as well as you kind of identify new needs or new use cases in the market?
Absolutely. Yeah, completely agree with Mark's comment too. And then yeah, so we're active. We're very active in both Canada and the US. And again, because it's this configurable custom approach that I'm sort of describing, we're constantly configuring the system for various use cases. And oftentimes, quite honestly, the request that we get from Jessica's team or any other team is something we're already capable of doing, because it really comes down to, hey, how do you want to guide the patient, and then what is the information you want coming back, and what are your alert levels that you want to set, or what sort of support do you want to provide. We also allow for sensors to be put onto the platform to provide biofeedback, assistive devices. It's quite comprehensive. But then you're absolutely right. From time to time, we'll hear a new request around like, oh, this is something you want. Absolutely, it's so important for us to make sure that a little bit of different approaches, right? So the clinicians in the loop at the setup stage, there really isn't. I don't have an offering. I'm not. We're not going in and saying, please use this digital health tool or really digital therapeutic and change the way you work. It's, well, how do you work? Let's try and absorb it in.
With Goten is that he spends the time meeting with myself, with our clinicians, our physicians, to truly understand like our problem, right? And so, sometimes we have tech solution providers who are like, here's our tech, like, can it fit your problem? But it's more so, this is our problem. Can your tech be customizable enough to really meet, like, be our solution, right? And so I think when that alignment happens and when there's that co-design and, like you said, looping in the clinicians very early on, that is sort of what sets you up for success.
And I think that really came through then through that proposal as well, and the strength of it all, and really being able to tell that there's a clear understanding on both sides. What is the problem you're solving, and you've sort of collaboratively worked your way through that, and it showed for sure.
Jessica, as you were pulling the project together, was Tensor already on your radar, or were you kind of looking at multiple technology solutions?
Yeah, they were on our radar because our team has already been doing like some work with them. Our clinical technology lead and my co-investigator Robert, he's an occupational therapist. He had already had exposure with Tensor, and so I started to hear about Tensor, and I thought, oh, okay, like this sounds like it could meet this need. But I was still sort of early. Like I had just come to Edmonton, still trying to understand the landscape, and I really appreciated through the funding process, Nancy and Mark, that there was the opportunity to not just hear from Tensor, but to hear from other potential providers and to really help solidify that decision that, okay, this is the best one to meet the problem that and the needs that we have for this initiative. So they were up there, but I think, having the ability to compare them to other possible solutions that were out there really solidify that decision for us.
I think that is one of the maybe just to add on, that's one of the things that inside, but these two just sometimes don't find each other. They don't know each other. They don't talk maybe well to each other or speak the same language. So being able to be in a position where we can create and maybe bridge that gap, I guess, where we can allow them to find each other and have those conversations. And then I hope, Jessica, for you and maybe others that participated in the program on the health system side, get a better understanding of some of the technology solution providers you're already aware of, but maybe also be exposed to something that you were not aware of before, right? And maybe exploring that further and seeing what other problems might we be able to solve with these solutions that are out there that we didn't know before. And I think those are the kind of creative collisions when we can create them. That's something that really excites me about this kind of program as well.
Well, I think there's no shortage of amazing work happening in the province. And Nancy, to your point, I often find there's certain organizations that need to help be that connector because you'll
Yeah,
hear about something happening, in this part of the province and someone else doing something great here. And it's like, how do you bring all those people together to continue to like elevate and expand on the work that's being done?
absolutely.
So I know we're still early on in the project, but to date, any like big learnings from anyone around the table around this cross sector collaboration? Any surprises or challenges that have come up along the way?
Um, I can jump in and just give some reflections based on not just this project, but my time with the Glenrose. I've been here for 5 years and have been involved in health innovation previously for 5 years as well. And my evolution in thinking around this is earlier on, I thought I want what's cool, what looks nice, like the branding needs to be slick, like all that, like technology brand uh, was attractive to me. But you know, learning and failing on some implementation, you really realize that there's a few elements that you have to start with that are really core. Lived experience and understanding the pain of a problem firsthand is really important. So talking to the clinicians and understanding their pain points is critically important. Talking to the patients, obviously, and their pain is incredibly important. And so before you even think about the technology or innovation, if you don't think those things through in great detail, then you're setting yourself up for problem as a company or innovator. Health innovation in Alberta is incredibly complicated, and incentives vary across even the people on this call. Each of us have different incentives and drivers for why we do what we do. But so long as you're keeping the patient and the problem like front of mind, uh, everything else is a bit secondary for me in terms of principles. So the first principles are really, really important. Is like what is the pain? Have you experienced the pain? Because if you have personally, that adds a lot of value. And then deeply understanding the clinician's pain, the patient's pain around whatever problem you're solving is a first order step you need to take. And then after that, the trust and the relationship across all of us on this call, and then the patients and the clinicians is another thing that's often uh, the time spent on it is not sufficient to ensure that when problems arise with whether it's the implementation or the testing, trialing, or validating, you don't just give up because you're sick of dealing with some random technology company or research or foundation. You have the trust built and the relationship built so that you can work through them in a constructive way. And you've also spent the time to empathize and understand each other's incentive structures so that you can say, Nancy, I understand, where your funding comes from, what your board composition looks like, where your pain points are, so that if a problem arises, I don't go, well, do something about it when I know that you can't do anything about it. We have to find a workaround. And so figuring out the incentive structures of partners, incentive structures of patients, providers, et cetera, did I spend a lot of time thinking about. And then the last thing, and this has nothing again to do with technology or innovation, that's kind of like second, third order thinking. Honestly, it's like how much friction is there between what you're trying to create and what the person's trying to use. And I always think about my in-laws, they're in their 70s. And, as Chat GPT and all these large language models have come out, at first I'm showing my mother-in-law, like, you want me to help you write a email to somebody that's going to be And so I always think about that as an example is like, can a 75-year-old use it without having to call somebody like multiple times? And if they can, they find value, that's when you know you have something really special in terms of a product at the end of those kind of first, second, third order principles that we think through. So that's been my evolution. And so when we looked at these proposals, that was always top of mind for me. We did have an external advisory group.
Resonated there, Mark. And I too would say the whole like, the glitzy sort of innovation and it has to be like flashy and all that stuff and sexy. I think that was sort of my sense. I came from the health system and I always knew, okay, we got to do things differently, which is what brought me here to Alberta Innovates in the first place and sort of being well embedded in it. And then recognizing, okay, like it takes a lot to move the needle and to get people move forward here. And maybe where can I position myself for that system level type impact? But when I first came here, that was honestly my naivete thinking, oh, we're dealing with this like sexy technology but it's not about that. And so in a partnership like this one and other partnerships that we've worked through in the past 2 years, we've come to learn then that really sort of integration beats the invention. So it's not just whatever the invention is. I don't care how flashy you make it, or by the end of the day, is like Mark said, does it serve the patient or the Albertan? Not everyone is necessarily a patient who does receives sort of a care pathway, but does it serve the Albertan? And then two, will it stick? Will it integrate? Does it make sense? And will it work? And so that is something that I'm excited. First, that's a learning, but then two, it's something I'm excited about moving forward. So through the work, Gotham, like you and Jessica, you're doing now, and through this partnership, understanding more and leaning into what are some of the learnings that we can take away from this as it relates to integration, long-term sustainability, procurement. You mentioned, Jessica, when we're talking about a technology solution, what will it take to get there? And so leaning on our partners to better understand that so that we, in the end, can go back and create and build the kind of programs and partnership in the future through that iterative process that are even stronger and serving our clients even better to get to a place where we really create that impactful change, that something that sticks. So that is something that I've learned and then I'm really excited about. And then two, again, we have a number of partnerships across our portfolios. Being able to partner and come together with a group that is sort of has the skill and the will is something that I've sort of learned from my mentors here. Skill and will. So, you often have people that, yes, we have maybe the same goal, or you can get really excited about something, and then you also bring the skill, maybe, and the appetite for risk. And so there's a few things. You can't just have that desire. It gets even easier when you have a group that brings skill and excitement and curiosity and an understanding that there are some risks with innovation, there is failure with innovation. um, but when you're comfortable with that and you can continue to move forward and make those quick decisions, I think that really helps, and that really makes the journey. It makes it fun. It makes you able to produce and get things done. And I really appreciated that in the work and the experience that we had with everyone on the call here today, on the technology solution provider side as well. Right? It's like, okay, are you able to put out your LOI, like your expression of interest, and then you get to come and pitch, and then sort of you were given certain parameters around that, and just being able to be flexible and put yourself out there and do those things. I think it's really amazing to see that happening. So yeah, there's lots of good learnings, and really looking forward to thinking about how we can do better in the future even, and really thinking about that sustainability piece.
And just on the idea of risks, I'll give my board a little bit of credit here because there was one of my board members, Maureen, that initially made the connection with Alberta Innovates and the foundation, and she was excited by the opportunity of differently about how we're doing business. And the whole concept of risk for health organizations is interesting because oftentimes you get boards who are volunteer and they're risk adverse because they don't spend enough time in the business to really understand it. And what are the risks involved with that? The conversation needs to happen more around, if you stay the same and don't change,
Mhm.
what are the risks inherent in that? And my argument today, more than ever, is that the risk of the status quo is more risky than the risk of the unknown, because as much as there's a lot of disruption in the healthcare system right now, it's even going to be more of a disruption is technology. And I don't think that we're thinking through the step change that's going to occur in the next 3, 5, 10 years as it relates to technology and healthcare enough. And what I would encourage and do encourage policymakers to think about is health innovation in technology, and how we can be prepared for the future. All systems are inherently risky, and for good reason. However, we need to think through, as a policy for this province and our country, how can we be at the frontier in a way that's safe for our patients, but also prepared for the future? Because technology will inevitably reduce, which is one of the biggest drivers for why politicians and policymakers make decisions, is around cost. Like, that's the conversation: cost and patient flow. It's not around innovation. And I would argue that we don't spend enough time or resources as a community thinking through how we can innovate now in preparation for the future, because ultimately it's going to solve those two key problems that are driving their decision makings today. But those are policy decisions that they're making that are today focused than 3, 5 years into the future. And so, um, when we're thinking about risk as an organization, as a government, politicians, I just urge that we think about it both as the risks of the status quo versus the risk of future projects.
Yeah, and if you have ever listened to Dr. Ewan Affleck, he talks about specifically the risk around sort of privacy and data, or the fact that we do not share data, which is obviously fundamental to some of the digital solutions that we're using. And he proposes a framework of harm. And so, talking about risk, Mark, actually not receiving the care that you should be receiving, some of the problems that you're solving, Jessica, that is a form of harm. So reframing that, and I would really encourage the audience to have a look at this harm framework that he and his team proposes. It's really helpful to look at it that way and think about, okay, actually it's more harmful to not share the data, because we're saying privacy is important, and it is. But also the fact that we don't share the data now puts people's lives at risk. So the harm there's a broad definition of it. And there are many different aspects. And when you understand and look at it that way, you understand that, okay, actually we can and probably should be rethinking how we do things.
And just to touch on a little bit of that, Jen, if I could, I think like one of the successes so far, and I know it's early, like you said, but Nancy mentioned, you got to get the right team together with the right skill, will, and appetite for risk, which Mark also touched on. And I think that's what's been unique about this, is being a researcher embedded in the hospital. It's really embracing the diversity at the table. Like, I think it's very difficult for clinicians. Like, everyone's going to have different skill set. I mean, the will is there, but then the appetite for risk is going to differ based on your background, right? Like, Dolphin's appetite for risk is probably higher than the clinicians. Like, as a researcher, maybe mine is higher than a clinician. So, bringing everyone to the table and embracing that diversity, between the clinical teams, the tech partners, operational leaders, the researchers. I mean, we all bring essential perspectives and they're all different, right? But when each voice is valued, and I think the solutions become more robust, right? Because you have that good mix, right, of different people with skills, wills, and appetites for risk. So I think that's what's been really great about this project, and a lot of the initiatives that our hospital R&I department is supporting.
completely agree. If I could jump in as well on this concept, right? So I agree with everything that's been said, and two things that stand out to me is one way to paraphrase a bit of what was said is in healthcare, adoption is hard, right? Both at the provider level and at the patient level. So the glitziness of the technology doesn't matter so much as whether adoption can take place. But then the second co-equally important thing is, are you solving the right problem? And so that's where I think the thoughtfulness with which this project has been put together really comes through, because there are lots of problems where, speaking selfishly as Tensor for a minute, a digital care layer makes sense. But we've got a limited. Mark started at the beginning of this podcast was like, well, we've got a limited amount of resources. So the question is, how do you leverage the resources to create the organizational transformation that then requires the technology to be integrated to then create a new program that actually creates a meaningful impact at the health economics level, right? And so, going after the rural problem, it's a big, gnarly problem. I think love the word wicked. It's a wicked problem. And so we've selected that very carefully as well, and that comes true. So that's been really, I think, a standout thing from an industry partner's perspective around how this project's been put together.
Well, and I think too, having the patient at the center of the work that everyone is doing and keeping that focus on, okay, how do we impact, how we change that patient and their journey through the system. And I think also what I love about this is you're making change in the system, and that helps to free up resources in other areas sometimes to help address other challenges that we're seeing in the healthcare system. As given everyone's different unique role and part of this project team, everyone, if you want to think about it or jump right in, what excites each of you most about the future of rehabilitation care, generally, or even just here in Alberta?
I can start, and I always try to bring it back to the individual, because rehab, as was mentioned already, is very very individualized, very personalized. Unlike a surgery where it's like you're going to fix a broken bone, that's what's going to happen. Everybody has different hopes, dreams, and aspirations. And so, I don't even like when we generalize patient, client. Like, I think about Joe, I think about Christoph, I think about Liam, Hudson, I think about the individuals, their families, and the hopes and aspirations that they have in their lives. And then what we can do, not only with adoption so that they can achieve those, but just even to give them that hope that things might be different in the future for me, because there are people like those on the call that are working towards solutions to their problems. That excites me. And obviously, robotics and AI are very well equipped to tackle future rehabilitation challenges. And I think in Edmonton and Alberta, we're very well positioned, both through the work at universities and organizations like Amy, where we do have world leaders in that area. And I'm excited to continue to make the Glen Rose a hub for innovation in these areas, and want to open doors in ways that the healthcare system hasn't really thought about innovation for. So I think, as a foundation, and with our partners here and at the hospital, we're well equipped to tackle those problems in different ways. But just when I talk to patients and their families, um, that's when it really hits home for me that, oh, this is not just some abstract topic that's talked about at conferences, or on the news, or in papers or journals, but there's an individual there that could be your husband or wife, or son or daughter, or mom or dad, or grandma and grandpa, that need a practical solution today, in order to get back to their community or their home or their work or their school. And to be able to offer that, or to be part of that, is really inspirational for me.
Thank you, Mark. And I just to add on to that comment, I just you know, in the foundation, your teams do just a really good job in sharing those patient stories and sort of being more removed now in the position that I'm in. It's always really helpful and grounding to be reminded of those patient stories, which you know we maybe hear less of. So really appreciate anytime patient stories are shared through the foundation. And then for me, I think we kind of said it already, but I'm just really excited to continue in a positive way, in a way that I feel like we have some influence and control, contribute to the whole refocus health system refocus efforts here in Alberta, and bringing the right people together. And so the future of rehabilitation care is one piece of it, but then taking those learnings even broader and see how can we have those system level impacts, you know, that benefit all Albertans, and then really lean on, you know, Jessica and your team's Gotham, and really understanding what will it take to make these types of solutions stick and then help others in the future along their journey as sort of that innovation agency here in Alberta, really leaning on partners and experts like the ones here at the table to be able to serve both this group and then future groups as well, and do it in a way that is better and more effective to ultimately bring about better outcomes and health system efficiency. So that's what I'm kind of excited about on a big picture.
Yeah, and I guess to touch on that, it's really just more accessible, personalized, and continuous care. And so meeting people where they're at in their real environments, and you know, with having care not being bound by clinic walls or the long wait lists that we have. Um, yeah, I think that's where we see it. Like it's not technologically advanced, you know, it's more than that. Like it's fairer, it's more inclusive, and ultimately more responsive. And that's where tends to really fitting to go to, like with being very personalized to the patient.
Yeah, yeah, I completely agree with all comments, and Jen, what a great question, right? Because it's what's exciting, and so to me, um, the way I would phrase it is, in rehab, we've got a pretty large problem as a society, right? Because it's, as Mark said, it's meant to be person centric, and we've got to keep it person centric. But we've got a shortage of providers, and clearly the demographic data suggests we're going to have more demand for rehab services. So big problem. Thinking about the problem in the right way, with the appropriate empathetic frameworks, appropriate regulatory frameworks, appropriate implementation frameworks, and economic frameworks. But it's a unique time where the problem's huge, but the solution is within. We don't have a problem of the physics, right, where it's not doable. The technology is there, the will is there, the people are there, the funding's clearly there. And so it's a really exciting time, I think, over the next 5 years to see how this evolves with the support of projects like this.
That's fantastic. This has been such an exciting conversation, and I love just seeing a partnership in action. And honestly, I can't wait to see. Maybe we'll have to have you back 2 years when the project wraps up and see where it's all at, the lessons learned, and the amazing impact that we're having on community through the project. So I can't thank you enough, Nancy, Mark, Jessica, Gautam, for coming on the show today and really sharing about, the great innovation that's happening here in Alberta. And I think this partnership is really inspiring, and I hope people who are listening really think about, collaboration in a different way and the importance of bringing those right partners around the table to make great work happen. Because to points made earlier, there is a lot of great things happening. There's a lot of innovation. And I think as long as we keep that patient at the core and the center of everything that we do, it's going to be, got him to your point, the next 5 years are going to be really exciting in Alberta. And it's going to be neat to watch and see how everything evolves and this all comes